Hey folks, welcome again to Israel Explains, where we give you an in-depth dive into the latest news on the Israeli agenda. Well, if you're following this war at all, you're very well aware of the fact that hundreds of Hamas terrorists are surrendering. The IDF estimates that about 100 terrorists a day are being brought into the country for arrest and questioning. This has immediate effects. Obviously, less terrorists to deal with, frees up the military to move on elsewhere. There is a lot of intel being gathered on tunnels where terrorists are, including leaders, and perhaps most crucially from the Israeli perspective, and where the hostages are and what their conditions are. But another very important element of this is morale. Not only is it good for the morale of the Israelis and soldiers, it's also bad for the morale of other Hamas terrorists and increasingly paints them in a bad light for their society. And we're really seeing the effects of these victory pictures in terms of splitting the Hamas leadership. And what we're seeing is that Sinwar, who is the de facto leader of Hamas in Gaza, is being increasingly isolated by the Hamas leadership. Another way of putting this is that the other leaders are throwing him under the bus. For Hamas leadership, aside from Sinwar, who this is his pet project, they're starting to view what happened on October 7th as a mistake. Not necessarily for moral reasons, obviously, and not even the fact that Israel was attacked in a big, spectacular way, but I think the viciousness of the attack has been problematic for Hamas on a few levels. First, it's created a relentless effort on the Israeli side to destroy them. There is such high motivation in Israel to destroy Hamas that there's never been anything like it before, and that is a problem. It's tarnished Hamas's reputation abroad. There's actors that used to be willing to work with them that aren't, and it's damaged their relationship with one of their main sponsors, Qatar. In fact, speaking of Qatar, Qatar has told the leaders of Hamas that they're no longer safe in the country. And therefore, there have been a lot of reports, so far not confirmed, that the leaders of Hamas in Qatar are in Algeria or on their way to Algeria. And I'll update on that once I know. And of course, there's also personal rivalry between Sinwar, who sees himself as the greatest leader in Hamas and the person who should be calling the shots, and the people in Qatar, or maybe no longer in Qatar, who are at least nominally above him and should be making the decisions. So when you take all these things together, it's no surprise that the Hamas leadership from outside Gaza is throwing Sinwar under the bus. They're blaming the attack on Sinwar. Therefore, they're blaming the attack's fallout on Sinwar. That way, they hope to rescue the reputation of Hamas and possibly save their lives from Mossad and possibly CIA assassination as well. According to some reports that I've seen, a lot of Hamas commanders in Gaza are turning on Sinwar as well. And that's not too surprising considering the beating that they're taking. And on some level, the ineptitude with which Sinwar has run this operation, um, his inability to keep the units in touch with each other. So when terrorists are surrendering to Israel, what they're telling their IDF investigators repeatedly is that the main reason that they're surrendering is that they're not getting orders from Sinwar. Sinwar has lost touch with a lot of his battalions. That's something that, of course, Israel has done intentionally. And then they're also not getting weapons and they're also not getting supplies. And so they're surrendering. So a lot of the other commanders resent the fact that Sinwar put them in this position. So all of these factors have led to a um, move against Sinwar, mostly led from outside of Gaza, but they're using commanders in Gaza in order to further that agenda as much as they can. Now, the rift that they've had with Sinwar isn't just a personal one, and it's not only about responsibility for the conflict. It's also about the day after. So in Israel, there's day after arguments between Gantz and Netanyahu that are becoming increasingly political, and Hamas is having the exact same thing. Their main leaders in exile, that's Khalid Mashal, Ismail Hania, and Abu Marzouk, are all talking to the PA. They're talking to the PA about some sort of cooperation in the day after. They realize, or they at least believe, that Gaza is lost to Hamas in the way that it was ran before, as a Hamas fiefdom. So, in order to ride out this negative wave from their perspective, they're willing to join with the PA as junior partners in governance. That would remove them from being the head honchos in Gaza, but it would put them in an official capacity in running the West Bank. So there is an advantage to them. And they're also hoping that by being part of the PA, they can rebuild their relations with moderate Arab states and get themselves out of isolation. And of course, as I said, possibly by getting the legitimacy of the PA, save their lives from assassination. Now, according to reports in Palestinian media and Israeli intel reports, when Yehya Sinwar found out that there's a coordinated move to negotiate with the Palestinian Authority, he had what can only be referred to as a hissy fit, broke things in the bunker, yelled at people, cursed at people, threatened that he was going to kill everyone, that sort of thing. His vision is that Hamas will fight until the death in Gaza, do everything that it can to retain some control in Gaza, and only worry about the day after once the fighting has stopped. He feels that trying to come to a deal with the PA right now undermines the morale of his troops. And of course, he's 100% correct. And the Hamas leadership knows that. But obviously, as always, they prefer their own interests to the interests of the people on the ground in Gaza. And that not only includes the civilians, it also includes the Hamas rank and file. So Hania is now openly saying no longer shady deals or behind the scenes exploration. Hania is openly saying Hamas wants to join the PLO in a united governance framework. Now, a little bit about the PLO. Sometimes people mix up what the PLO is and what Fatah is. So the PLO is an umbrella organization that was created in the 1960s. By the way, not by the KGB, but by Palestinians, with help from the Egyptians, in order to contain all the different Palestinian groups. So there's all sorts of groups in there. There's Palestinian women groups, and there's communists, and there's nationalists, and there's more liberal factions. There's all sorts of things. Fatah is the terrorist group, originally a terrorist group, led by Yasser Arafat, that was by far the most powerful faction within the PLO. So sometimes people say PLO and Fatah as if they're the same thing, but Fatah is just the dominant faction within the PLO. So a lot of what's being talked about now is bringing Hamas into the PLO. And that could have some serious consequences. The PLO may end up, because Hamas is actually very popular right now, the PLO may actually end up being a Hamas-led umbrella organization. And since the PLO has international recognition from all sorts of actors, including the state of Israel, that could lead to a lot of weird outcomes. Now, because the PLO has recognized Israel and Israel's recognized the PLO, that leads to a lot of questions. What would happen if Hamas joined the PLO? Well, Abu Marzouk, who's the number three in Hamas, gave an interview. And he said, if we were to join with the PLO, we should follow the official stance. Quote, the official stance is that the PLO has recognized the state of Israel. End quote. Now, some people have said that this is some kind of historic moment that Hamas is offering to recognize Israel. It's not. It's not. But it is important. The reason it's important is because what Abu Marzuk is doing is he's saying Hamas is willing to do what it takes in order to join the PLO and in order to become part of the PA, to get that PA seal of approval that might allow Hamas to become more internationally recognized. So Hamas may be willing in the future, in return for all sorts of concessions, I'm sure, be willing to nominally recognize the state of Israel. Abu Marzuk's statement in and of itself does not entail that recognition. One theme that keeps emerging in the talks between the PA and Hamas, according to PA officials who've been leaking this, that Sinwar made a mistake in attacking Israel, and that Hamas wants nothing more to do with Sinwar after this. So they're trying to show the PA they can be more trustworthy, that they can work with them, that they are willing to accept some sort of recognition with Israel, hoping that they can have some kind of soft landing within the PA. And they, as far as they're concerned, the leadership, Abu Marzuk, Mashal Hania, and all those guys, they're telling Abu Mazen and his people that they had nothing to do with planning October 7th, and that this mistake, which has brought a absolute catastrophe on the people of Gaza, is all all Sinwar's fault. That is patently false. We know it was the um, exiled leadership, Hania, Mashal. They met with the Russians. They met with the Iranians. They coordinated with them. They were behind all the diplomatic moves that facilitated this attack. So it's quite possible that Sinwar planned the military element of this along with his henchmen in Gaza, and they weren't that involved, but they created the entire diplomatic umbrella for the terrorist attack. So the responsibility is on them, and there's no way Sinwar could fund it without the money that they um, arranged from Qatar and from other places. So they own it just as much as Sinwar does, but they're smarter political operators. They're washing their hands from it now. Now, the Israelis have noticed, to put it mildly, they've noticed the split in Hamas, and they're trying to do things in order to exploit it. One thing I've been hearing from my personal sources in the IDF and from leaks is that there are a lot of people in the security services in Israel who think that Israel should consider the following deal. It's not clear that anyone will accept it, but they think Israel should consider the following deal. Release all the Palestinian prisoners that Hamas wants in exchange for all the hostages and for Sinwar being exiled from Gaza. So put a lot of pressure on Hamas outside and on the local commanders to remove Sinwar. The logic behind this is that Sinwar is basically the only thing keeping this military operation going. A lot of other people in Hamas want to stop. And with Sinwar gone, resistance in Gaza would collapse. I think this is a terrible idea. I think that releasing all the prisoners would actually give a boon to the fighting in Gaza, and I don't see the terrorists in Gaza just giving up because Sinwar isn't there. I think the whole idea is stupid. But it does show the IDF is trying to deal with that split. Another thing that the IDF is doing in reaction to this problem, it's putting an old-fashioned Wild West kind of wanted poster on Yahya Sinwar. Anyone who gives information in Gaza that will lead to the capture of Sinwar is going to get $400,000. Anyone who does the same for Muhammad Def, the shadier military commander in Gaza who's been out of view for a long time, will get 100,000. Honestly, I think that's pretty cheap, and Israel should be offering more. But that's another way that Israel is trying to isolate Sinwar, hopefully some of these Hamas operatives, terrorists, I should say, who are sick of Sinwar might want to cash out with a few $100,000 and get rid of the person who's responsible for putting them in this situation. I would say Israel should not engage right now with this issue. Napoleon said, and not sure he actually said it, but it's a great quote nonetheless, never interfere with an enemy while they're in the process of destroying themselves. Hamas is now ripping themselves apart. Israel interfering too much in that may actually backfire, especially that kind of deal that we were talking about. That sounds terrible. What's causing the split is the quality and the escalation of the Israeli operation in Gaza. That's putting immense pressure on Sinwar. The only thing you need to do to put more pressure on Sinwar and make this split exacerbate is continue the operation. Also helpful, make sure that the Hamas brass abroad are terrified for their lives. It may almost be counterproductive to kill them at this point. I'm not sure. But one thing that would be great is if they're always looking over their shoulder, if they're concerned that Israel knows where they are, and that their decisions may ultimately affect whether they're assassinated or not. It could be useful to keep them alive, terrify them, kill them after the operation. Something definitely to think about. But it's not time to engage with Hamas. They're showing weakness. They're talking about recognizing Israel. No way we should engage with that at all. Keep pushing. These are cracks. These are signs of weakness. Keep pushing. Hamas may ultimately collapse through these splits. And of course, even though they're talking about joining the PA, Israel has to stand firm against that, be unwilling to bring the PA into Gaza under any circumstances if Hamas is included as a junior partner. Indeed, as we've talked about in previous episodes, Hamas has to be reformed from the root. And bringing in Hamas, of course, is the absolute opposite of that. I think I said Hamas. The PA has to be reformed from the root. Bringing in Hamas is the absolute opposite of that. It's what Hamas wants, and it's what Israel doesn't want. So instead of engaging with this, Israel needs to keep pushing. All this is good news for the Israeli operation. Okay, so thank you so much. As always, if you have any questions, leave them here. Make sure to subscribe, and I will be seeing you all tomorrow.